welcome back to another episode of Shine Sis Podcast with Mary and Candace.
Yes, welcome back, listeners.
And as y'all can see, today we have Miss Barb Neely again joining us. Yes, thank you for coming on again.
Yeah, one of the things, obviously we had you on just to remind our listeners, she is the owner and founder of Mama's Brown Sugar, a natural skincare line, and also a former Army wife, correct? Former Army wife. And, we talked about a few different topics last time, but, we didn't really get to hone in on one of the more important topics, which was, you discussed how your son was diagnosed with autism while you guys were active duty military family. And by, April being the Autism Awareness Month, those are one of the things that we just wanted to come back and have a conversation with you to kind of discuss your journey of, raising a son, dealing with autism in the military with the headaches of transferring and moving from here to there.
Yeah. So my son, he was about, I guess, one. We were stationed in Germany, and he had a provider, which my friend was actually my provider at the time. And I was working, and she started to notice some things that he was doing. One of the things she was like, she asked me, have you ever noticed that whenever you talk to him or call him, that he doesn't respond? And, we later found out that it was because he actually had 50% of his hearing had fluid in his ears, had fluid in them. So we didn't find that out till we got back to the States. But she also noticed like little behaviors, like he could find the tiniest like threads or string in a carpet. He would line like his cars up, which is common for kids that are on the spectrum. So he would line up his cars and things. And then if someone was holding him, he would twirl and mess with their hair, and he would try to put it in his mouth, all these different things. So there was a lot of behaviors that we really, I said, well, no, I really hadn't, noticed. But after she pointed out that he didn't, like the TV was on, that he didn't look at it or things like that, then I started paying attention to that. And I thought, well, he's just one, at one, kids don't sit down and watch TV. They're like all over the place. So once we got back to the States, he was at a daycare, I guess, like one of those Head Starts, programs. So he would go, and they actually started picking up on some of the behaviors. And they, told me that they thought maybe I should take him to get him tested to see if he was, autistic. Nobody wants to hear that. So as a parent, so I'm kind of like, well, my son's not autistic or anything, blah, blah, blah. So I did take him. My husband and I went to Keesler in Mississippi to take him there. To get him tested. Of course, at 2, you're too young. You're not young enough for them to really diagnose you with autism. So they diagnosed him with PDD. Well, we didn't know what that was. I mean, it's kind of like they are not autistic because they really can't diagnose him, but they have like some traits. So, we kind of was like, okay, we were made aware. So we went from Enterprise to we got to North Carolina, and then that's when everything, came to head, and we found out we were on a waiting list to get him seen on the military base 8 months. I mean, we were desperate. It was the behaviors were starting to surface, and usually you won't really notice until they start school. Well, he was ready to start school, but at 4, I mean, really, I should have waited because boys really aren't ready like girls. I mean, he academically, he was ready, he knew what he needed to know for kindergarten, but as far as the behavior, he was not ready. But I went ahead and enrolled him in school, and every single day we were getting calls. He would be, touching the kids next to him, or he would just be doing things that was just not normal, but we didn't know at the time. So once we took him in and had him evaluated on post by a behavior pediatrician, she was the colonel, and she'd, gone all over, I guess, studying in this field. So she was, she was well sought. So we got him in, and she just was like, oh, he's high functioning autistic, and I thought, oh my goodness. My husband and I didn't know anything. I mean, the only thing we knew about was Rain Man, which, that is not accurate. That is not, that's what we mostly, I
Right.
think the picture we get, you hear about autism, people are like, oh, Rain Man. It's like, no, that's not it. He was a savant. So anyway, we got in to see her, and she got him, started on to see a behavioral pediatrician there at the clinic. And she also, gave him some medicine, which I was like against starting him on medicine, but we were like, okay, he's got to be able to function in school. Because, one of the things is like the sitting still, the whole attention span, the touching, the constant moving. There was just a lot of behavior. And my husband and I were just so tired at the time, of just going back and forth with this. And so we got him started on medication. And when I tell you that was a journey, it was a journey. Because usually you've got to, learn. So finally, you have to learn, of course, with kids that are on the spectrum. So my son went through different behaviors where I would actually have to sit and hold him, which a lot of times you have to restrain kids depending on, where they are. And so I can remember having to sit down on the floor with him and restrain him at times, and he would headbutt, and medicine just had him out of control. And I thought, well, this medicine isn't working. Then so they put him on a different medicine. Then I was like, okay, well, this medicine's got him crying all the time, sleeping all the time. This isn't working either. So I kind of got tired of the, going back and forth with the medicine. So I finally had to stop working, like so many parents do, and stay home. So I gave up my job and I became a full-time mom, and just really started to delve into educating myself about how I could help my son. We moved him to a different school. I mean, we just went around and around. So we moved him to a school. He had an awesome teacher at that school, because the first school that we enrolled him in was kindergarten. And the teacher she was not, I mean, even though she had 30 years of experience, everybody, just because they're a teacher, does not have experience in dealing with kids on the spectrum. And so, as a parent, you have to be your kid's advocate. And I was at that school all the time. And that was one of the points I made. So whenever I had a meeting with the principal, she tried to intimidate me by saying, well, you can't move him. He can't be moving. I said, well, it's my child. I can do whatever I want to do with him. He's not advancing here. Because she was more concerned about the school of excellence. So, okay, they have to live up to a certain, fit the mold or fit the place here. And I thought, well, he's not fitting here. He's not getting what he needs here. So I'm going to move him. So we moved him to the other school. He thrived there. I mean, he advanced in all, areas, which I was at the school all the time. I became like one of the room moms. So I could just, spend more time with him, but also be at the school to kind of see what was going on and how he was behaving. So he was advancing in the school, but he was still in what they call, he was being mainstreamed out. So he was in a classroom with other kids who were more severe, had to stay in that classroom. I mean, you're talking about kids that were in fifth grade that weren't potty trained. So those teachers had to deal with all of that. So then he got mainstreamed out, and eventually he was completely out of the classroom with an aide who would come into the classroom and help him in areas that he needed it. But there was still a struggle. He still would not sit still. He still couldn't focus. So of course, if he's not sitting still, he's not retaining any information. So then I looked, into more things, and the speech therapist said, well, we can try a few things. We can put a weighted vest on him because, the compression of that actually helps kids, that are on the spectrum. We can also put like a stool like up underneath his feet. That way it'll help him kind of, be balanced and he can sit. So those things actually really did help. But still they were, a lot of the teachers, all they want to do is, some teachers, they just want to medicate, And so I got that a lot, because I took him off of the medicine just to give his body a rest, because one of the medicines that they had him on, the last medicine that he was on, come to find out when I did my research, it caused heart problems. Well, that explained why when he went in for a physical, the doctor told me that his heart was enlarged. And I was like, no, so I thought, what in the world? He's too young for this. So when I did my research, like I said there, I found out that medication, that was one of the drawbacks of it. And I took him off of that. So I took him off of the medicine. And then I also found that, heavy metals being in the body. So I found that you can detox with clay. So I started giving him the clay baths, and that really did help. I gave him the clay baths. I also found out that if you mixed magnesium, B vitamins, and I believe it was vitamin C, that actually was the key. So I started giving him that kind of cocktail, if you will. And the teachers, I didn't tell them I was doing this. They thought he was being medicated. Like, oh my goodness, he's doing so much better. What are you, and is he on medicine? I said, no, he's not on medicine. I said, I told them what I was doing. It's like, would you mind if we share with other parents? And I was like, absolutely, because we're in this together. I want, them to share that information because, we don't need to have these kids. A lot of this medication that's out here is not good. I mean, it has tons of side effects. So we got past that. And then, of course, we had to move to Texas. And then once again, we had to start all over because then he was in third grade. They said there was like thousands of families there that had special needs kids. It seemed like he would make friends easily, but he couldn't keep them, which is a disadvantage to kids that are on the spectrum. They can make friends, but as soon as kids realize, kids pick up on things quick. Oh, there's something quite different. Something's different. They pick up on these things that the kid is not the same or something's off. And then they just kind of, once again, then he doesn't have, friends to play with. So we went through that, off and on. He would, make friends, just then he wouldn't have friends. And so it was kind of lonely for me as well, because, a lot of the parents too, it's like my friends, they didn't understand what I was going through because their kids weren't on the spectrum. So it was just, it was a lonely time for me. And it was also a lonely time for him until we moved to Texas. And then once we moved to Texas, it seemed like every friend that I made, they had a kid that was on the spectrum. And so, we were able to kind of, have play dates and interact with, get together with our kids or take turns, with the kids coming by, because it literally wears you out. I mean, it's a full-time job with trying to find out what works, what doesn't work. And, all I can say is I'm so thankful I got to stay home because, a lot of parents don't, moms don't have that. And I can't even imagine how far my son or how, backwards he may be if I didn't stay home to be able to spend that time, because teachers only have so much time in a day. And really, honestly, the work needs to come from home. And so, I did a lot of work at home, but I did not want my son to be living a label. So we made sure we took him on vacation. I mean, he would go on vacation, and in the earlier days, he would cover his ears because all the noise for them is like scratching on a chalkboard. So the sensory overload, the lighting might be off. We go in places, and I remember when he was younger, we'd go in the store, and I was like, why is he screaming? What in the world? I didn't know at the time. And it would be the lighting in there. So later on, I found out that, certain lighting would also, bother them. But we took them on vacations everywhere where there was tons of kids, tons of things going on. We made sure we didn't allow him to eat and be picky. He ate everything. In fact, he eats more foods than I eat now, just because we were like, no, he's going to be going places. We're not going to be sitting at home. And in the beginning, it was hard. I mean, we would be in a restaurant and he would just be sometimes screaming, or just that behavior, people looking at us, and we would just have to grab our food and go. And we just so we just got to the place where we would just be at home with the movie on, having date night at home, unless we, can get a sitter. So, there was just a lot of sacrificing in the beginning to get him there. And then as he got older, there was just other behaviors too, constantly at the school. Like I said, I was like, I just need to stay at home, because every time I got a job, they'd be calling, oh, you need to come. We've got this going on, today with your son. And
can I ask you?
Got tired of it.
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, you're fine.
I was wondering, when you talk about some of the schools that he attended, are these like regular public schools, or were these like the military schools on base? I was just wondering if there's a difference, if you saw any type of difference between the schools.
He did. Now, at Fort Bragg, Fort Bragg, we lived off post initially. So he went to just your traditional schools. Then we moved on post and he went to the OD schools. Now there is a difference because when we went on post, I had no idea. Like teachers on post that are DOD, they cannot be fired. They will not be fired. So when he started to have issues with the teacher there, and I went and I said he's digressing, and the principal was like, "Oh my goodness," he was all dramatic. Oh my goodness, it hurts my heart to hear that. And I said, "Well, he is." I said, "Look at what he was doing just when we were off post." And I said, "Since he's come here, his reading has gone down, and this and that." And so the teacher, of course, she was like, "I have," she was young and spirited, and so she was like, "Oh, I have a master's degree. I have this and that and the other." And I said, "Well, that still doesn't qualify you to teach my son. I don't care if you had 10 PhDs. That doesn't mean that you are qualified just because you have that title to teach a kid who is, you got to have special training." So there was a huge difference. He just, on post, I felt like he lost a lot of what we worked so hard for off post, what we got, and so there was a lot of difference there. And then when we moved to Texas, they had a great system there. The IEP, they stayed on top of it. But there again, at those meetings, as a parent, you got to be in there, because if you're not, and if you don't really know what you're reading, they'll say, "Oh, the kid's going to be able to master this by this," and I ended up having to get an advocate. I had to get, he was, at the time, he was being seen by a therapist there, who was an ABA therapist, which is an applied behavioral analyst, who deals with kids that, of course, that's all he does, still with kids on the spectrum. And I can remember they were not implementing his IEP. He wasn't getting at the time what he needed in high school. And so a lot of the lingo, the way they write it, some of the stuff you understand, but as parents, unless you're in, have an educational background or you're in that field, some of the stuff is just like, okay, what does this mean here? So when I had him show up at a couple of the meetings with me, they were pretty intimidated because he made sure they didn't want him there. And so, but he was there. I was paying him to be there. And so he got things straightened out for Eric. And thank goodness I was able to have him come and show up, because there's no telling, he would have just been going around in this vicious cycle in the classroom. So I would say that, if parents out there, moms, dads, whoever it is, that is important, to show up at these meetings, to show up at the school, be active, because I can't tell you how many times the teachers have told me, "We are so glad that you are here," because a lot of the parents don't even show up to these meetings.
I can attest to that.
Can't imagine.
I'm sorry to cut you off, because my son has an IEP, so I know all too well about the meetings and just being there. You, like, as parents, you have to do your part, show up, just to show them, because otherwise the teacher's just going to be like, okay, well, obviously the parent doesn't care, so these goals that they have to meet, why should we care if the child reached those goals or not, and then sometimes they'll just put that IEP on the back burner, because it's like, well, if that parent is not showing that their commitment, let's just put them to the side and work on another child. And that's just true. Going back, I'm glad that you mentioned the IEP, and with the school system and stuff like that, because I was going to ask, were there like how was that transition like for you, like going from one school to the other? Once he was diagnosed with autism, did you immediately get the IEP started? Was he put with the EFMP for the military? Like how did that process work for you?
Mm-hmm. We had to get him signed up, which we got him signed up. My husband did right away in the EFMP. And then eventually he had an IEP at the other school, but you know how that is. Once you transition to another, now they have to start all over with, the IEP. And so it followed him around, but every school, every school system is different. And he's been in 3 school systems, so he was at Bragg, then we went to Texas, and then of course here in Alabama. And so each one of them do things different. The only one that I really did not care for, ARD here in Alabama, which is the same thing. The way they do things here is so, I constantly was going around with the high school here, with the way they were implementing his ARD and the way they did things. And so I was thankful when he graduated from here. I could not wait for him to get out of the school here. And it made me really wish that I would have left him to finish high school in Texas, because change is already hard enough for kids in high school that don't, have to deal with being on the spectrum or a disability. But when you talk about kids who already don't handle change, now you've moved them midstream of high school, which is a crucial time for them. He struggled. He struggled a lot. And, I was just thankful he didn't want to go to school. He didn't really make any friends here. It was a hard time, a whole, really hard transition here in Alabama. But Texas was great. I mean, he had the best experience there, made lots of friends. We had some bad times there too, but for the most part, the school experience for him there was great because he had friends. Got to go to the prom. He got to do some of the things that normally kids, a lot of even normal kids don't even want to go to the prom. They're shy, whatever it is. They don't want to do these things. But like I said, I made sure he got into sports.
That's
He played
awesome.
basketball. I tried to get him into, everything that I could. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to put him in the martial arts, whether he did good in it or not, I'd pull him out. Okay, let me try something else until I found something that worked for him. He did guitar lessons, which I wish he would have stayed with it because the teacher said that, he picked up the fingering right away. I mean, he was young and the first two lessons he had it, and he was just like, I thought something was wrong. And he was like, oh my goodness, I'm so excited. He was like, how hard? He was like, this is so hard for adults. He was like, yet your son, has picked this up. And, but he played, went a couple times and then he was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I'm like, I bought this guitar. You don't want to even go to, but I was like, okay, well, he doesn't want to do it. So you can't, what are you going to do? You can't make your kid. I'm not one of those parents that's like, okay, well, you got to do this because, because it's like, they're going to be miserable.
Right.
You're going to be miserable if you force them to do something they don't want to do. And then you're going to be miserable as well. So it's not about me. So I just was like, okay, well, let's try something else. And he loved basketball. I mean, he did well with that, plus by it being a group interaction, I think that was great for him because a lot of times they don't get around crowds. They just they're by themselves most of the time. And, he's older now, he lives with me, but a lot of times he's just perfectly content, being alone in his room or whatever. And I'm like, or come out and not, crowds, but he does get out and drive and has, he's got a few friends here now. Yeah, but it's been a
good.
long
I was going to
journey.
ask, like, how has his communication with other kids growing up? How was that? Because autism is so many forms of it. They got the nonverbal and then the verbal.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just going to ask. So he does well with as far as communicating and things like that.
He didn't initially. He would. I think for kids that are on the spectrum, for us, like if you say something, it's the whole literal thing. Like if you say, they will argue you down. If you say the sky is blue, no, it's not. The sky, no, And so for them, it's like if you say something, if I say something about maybe like your shirt or your hair, they take it. They take whatever it is, literally, it's not meant to be that way. So sometimes the processing, the information that, they get, they don't process it the same. And so that would create a lot of issues in school or just, with other kids at time, maybe not so much with kids because kids, can kind of work around it. But a lot of times the teachers, it created problems, just that, okay, this is what I'm receiving, but I'm, there's the teacher saying one thing, but I'm not receiving it that way. So there was some problems with the communication, from time to time that we had to work through. Of course, he was in speech. And then when he got to high school, after high school, we were like, well, what are we going to do? Once he graduated, they had this program called Project Search. And it's for kids that, are in that in-between stage that they need to go to work. Because a lot of times when kids, they have all these services when they're in school, but once they're out of school, now you're like, what are you going to do? They're an adult. They don't have all these things, and from state to state. Now, Texas had a ton of services. And when I tell you they had Fortune 500 companies there that actually would hire and work and mentor kids like that, once they get out of school and have them come there and work at these companies. Well, we get to Alabama, it's not the same. He's had a hard time finding a job. He's not working now. When COVID shut down, we were trying to find, he got laid off from the airport, and then he's been trying to get back there, trying to, get a job. So I was like, okay, well, he needs some kind of skill set. He didn't want to go to college. So what am I going to do? So I drove him 3 hours to Georgia to get his forklift training or certification. So he went there, took the training, got his certificate, he passed, and came back, so that's something that he has that he can use, in pretty much anywhere. So, I've tried to do everything that I can to advance and push him.
It definitely sounds
in a positive
like it.
way.
It definitely sounds like it. So pat your back.
You can't just let it.
Yes, pat your back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's, like I said, it's been, tough, but I look back and I'm like, wow, the things that, they were like, he's not going to drive, the therapist is like, well, I don't think he's going to drive. And I'm like, well, the devil is a lie. He's going to drive. Right. I'm not going to drive him around and he's going to be driving. And so I was like, I do not claim that at all. So he did. He, when he was in high school, you know how they have driver's ed, they would call me and say, well, he didn't show up he would go to the class, like the actual class. But when it was driving days, he'd go hide. He didn't want to drive. He was nervous. So they would call me and say, well, Eric didn't show up for driving today. And I was like, well, I don't, he's at school. I dropped him off at school. And they were like, well, so finally, when I had to talk with him, he was like, I'm never going to drive. I'm nervous and this and that. And I'm like, well, I don't know how you're going to get around because you're going to want to go all these places. And I'm not going to drive you. Mm-hmm. So you're going to want your own car and all this. So finally, what I had to do is through the project search that he was in, that's one of the other things. Kids that want to learn how to drive, it's free. They have a different program. So they take them. It's all paid for. They actually have a one-on-one. They take them out driving just like they would in high school. And then when they're ready, they actually do their testing there and not at the DMV. So, I mean, they that part of it was really great. And so he got his license. He didn't have to go, they're able to test. And then he took that, of course, there and was able to get his license. And so he's driving, he's been working with the public because, like I said, we kept putting him in the public. We were just like, okay, he's going to be out here with, people, with friends, with family. So we didn't shield him and say, oh, because he's got autism, we just can't. He can't do it. He can't do it. Because I've had friends that, when we were in Texas, they were that way. They shielded, some of them, they shielded their kids, and they wouldn't let them do anything. They were almost just like treating them like they were a baby. And I was like, no, he can do it. At least let him try to do it. And so, so he's grown. I mean, most people, when they see him, they have, they don't have any clue unless they know about autism. Then, my friends when I moved to Texas, she said when she met him, like in the neighborhood, because we lived in the same neighborhood, and her son was on the lower end of, the spectrum. And so she saw my son at the park just before I met her. And she was like, oh, I saw your son at the park. And she was like, and I told her, she was like, I didn't even know that he was on the spectrum. She said, but now that you say that, because she has a son, she was like, there was some things she picked up on when she thought about it. So her son loved to come by my house all the time. And my son loved to go over there because there was always like 50 kids over at her house because she loved kids. And so it was quiet at my house. So her son would come over and he'd like to talk, because I would talk to him and, whatever. So he would just come by the house. And then sometimes my son would go over there and have a sleepover, or he would come over. But the crazy thing is her son was scared of dogs. So the dog we had at the time would go have a sleepover at their house while the son comes over to our house, and so it was crazy, but we made it work, and so, but yeah, he's come a long, long way. And so I wasn't really sure how he would respond, when we were going through this divorce, because sometimes, they don't show any emotion. Like he doesn't show like emotion, like some kids, it's all over, they'll show it. But for him, he was like, oh, didn't bother me, that. And I knew it did bother him, because you can tell. And because, just certain things like nervous habits, like biting his nails or just doing things. And, maybe feeling, because there was just a rocky, when my husband before he left, there was just times when they'd just be like going at it, the older, I mean, just fist fighting. But then as my son got older, you know, you can't, and he's got shoulders that are broad, you know, my husband just couldn't handle him that way. But it was just sad because, you know, you don't want to see, you know, your son and your, the dad, you know, fighting.
Right.
And so I just felt kind of bad for my son. You know, my husband lives here now. He doesn't really see him that much. So I know that bothers him because he's probably feeling like, well, why can't I be accepted? You know, why, you know, and he's mentioned to me before how his dad will cater to other kids, you know, and not like, you know, I guess my husband didn't realize he picks up on those things, you know, or picked up on them, but he would talk to me about it. And he was like, well, he doesn't ever talk to me. And I'm like, because I take the time to listen. You have to take the time to listen and not just assume, okay, well, they're on the spectrum, so they don't really know anything or whatever, you know, because it's quite a bit, you know, it's kind of, he observes a lot and he knows a lot. So sometimes he's like my voice the reason when we go to the store, he's like, well, okay, you don't even need any more purses. You don't need this. And I'm thinking, okay, let me just do me, you know, so he's always like trying to save me money. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it. So, but like we do a lot of things together. Yeah, that he's kind of funny. He's like, okay, well, do you really even need this? And I'm like, yeah. So,
well, is there any?
So
I'm sorry. You go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to ask, was there any like advice you can give to like younger parents or, you know, ones that are just starting out freshly getting the news of their, you know, child being diagnosed with autism? Like, what advice could you give to them?
First, I would say, you know, if you even suspect that there's something not just a little bit different with your child, that you notice some certain kinds of behavior, you know, be sure to get them in as early as possible to get them, you know, diagnosed, because the older they get, you know, it gets, you know, you don't want to have a kid that's in high school getting diagnosed because it's really going to be tough. So I would say, you know, if you notice anything, the first thing is take them in and see if, you know, get them tested early on. And then second, I would say, you know, if you get the diagnosis, to make sure you educate yourself as much as possible about whatever the diagnosis is, and be active with the school or anything that they're involved in. Make sure that you are, you know, active there so that you can follow and advocate for them, because that's going to, you know, be the difference in whether they succeed or not as a parent, you know, just being active and
excellent,
getting them diagnosed
I believe
early
you
on.
personally, just hearing that story, that you definitely did a good, you know, an excellent job, and, you know, taking that on head on in terms of, you know, sacrificing to, you know, pretty much put your son first, and it obviously paid off. I mean, when you start doing things that the doctors are going to tell you that your kid will never do, that's already, you know, a testament to your efforts and stuff. So, like I said, kudos to you on that. Kudos to you on that one.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. So, you know, hopefully this will, you know, help some parents out there that are going through, you know, but like I said, just be active. You know, I had to do a lot of it on my own. My husband wasn't there to do a lot of it, or, you know, because he didn't want to be active. So, you know, even if you don't have a spouse that's supportive, you still, as a mom, you need to be their voice. You have to be there for them. Regardless, you know, if the grandparents are there or not there, you know. So a lot of it I had to do on my own once my parents died, because, you know, the other grandparents really are not those kind of grandparents, and that's okay. But like I said, you just have to, you know, you need to have your tribe. You got to have some kind of support that helps. But if you don't, then you have to be the support. So.
Well, thank you, Ms. Barb, for sharing your experience. Kudos to you. You did an amazing job.
Thank you, ladies. Once again, I certainly appreciate you having me on here and allowing me to be a part of your platform, and, you know, hopefully encourage and, you know, let someone else out there know that it's, you know, it's okay, that they'll live, you know, that there is life.
They'll get through it.
They'll get through it. Amen. They'll get through it.
All right. You ready for the affirmation, ma'am?
Let's do it.
I am.
Yeah, I am enough.
I am enough.
I have the power to create the life I desire.
I have the power to create the life that I desire.
I am worthy of my dreams.
I am worthy of my dreams.
Yes, there we go.
I am worthy of my dreams. Yes, yes.
Yes, I love that. That's amazing.
All right. Well, thanks again, Miss Barb. You have a good day. And remember, shine, sis. You got this.
You got this,
Shine.
girl.
Thank you.